The harvest fair was the brightest spot in the long year, a splash of noise and color against the simple, earthy tones of everyday life. The air, crisp with the coming chill of evening, was warm with the smells of roasting nuts and sweet pies. Laughter tangled with the lively notes from a fiddle, and in the center of the village green, young men and women danced, their boots kicking up little clouds of dust that glowed in the slanting afternoon sun. From the edge of all this merriment, Elara watched. She was not a part of the swirling colors, she was a steady, quiet figure beside her father's cart, its wooden boards stacked high with the soft, gray bundles of their spring wool clip. Her hands, capable and quick, arranged and rearranged the skeins of yarn she had spun herself, her eyes occasionally lifting to watch the easy grace of the dancers, a faint, wistful shadow in her gaze. She felt as plain as the undyed wool she sold, a creature of practical use in a world that seemed, for this one day, to celebrate only what was fancy and bright. The world of the fair was a river of movement, and Caleb was a rock in its current. He had come for nails and salt, practical things, and now his business was done. He stood near the edge of the crowd, a tall man in a worn work shirt, his hat pulled low enough to offer his eyes a respite from the sun and the busyness. He watched not with longing, but with a quiet man's assessment, his thoughts already turning back to the fences that needed mending and the cattle that would need feeding at home on his ranch. Needing a moment's quiet and a cool drink, he moved toward a stall piled high with apples, their red and green skins polished to a high shine. At that same moment, Elara, hoping a sweet apple might lift her spirits, stepped toward the very same pile. Their paths converged in a gentle collision, not harsh, but enough to startle the small basket she carried. It tumbled from her hands, and balls of her carefully spun yarn, the colors of oatmeal and stormy sky and rich earth, scattered and rolled across the trodden grass. A flush of heat rushed to Elara's cheeks. Muttering apologies, she dropped to her knees, her hands scrambling to gather her wares. Caleb was immediately on his knees beside her, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he collected the straying wool. "My fault, miss," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. In her fluster, and with a sudden, sharp pang of sadness from watching the carefree girls at the fair, a truth she too often felt whispered out of her without her meaning it to. "It's no matter," she breathed, more to the ground than to him. "I'm not pretty enough to be noticed anyway." The words hung in the air between them, a small, sad confession she instantly wished she could take back. Caleb went very still. He stopped gathering the yarn and looked at her, truly looked, not at the fair around them, but at her. He saw the honest weariness in her eyes, the work-strong hands clutching the wool, the sincerity etched on her face. He saw not a plain girl, but a real one. He finished picking up the last ball of yarn, a soft gray one, and placed it carefully back in her basket. Then he held her gaze, his own eyes clear and certain. "That's fine," he said, his tone not one of pity, but of simple, profound truth. "I need honest, not fancy." The words landed not like a criticism, but like a key turning in a lock she didn't know was closed. He then stood, selected a few apples from the pile, and paid for them. Before he turned to go, he picked up one of the skeins of wool from her basket, the color of rich soil. "I'll take this," he said, and pressed more coins than it was worth into her father's hand. With a slight tip of his worn hat, he walked away, leaving Elara sitting in the dust, her heart beating a strange, new rhythm, the world around her suddenly seeming full of a different, quieter kind of possibility. The golden piece of the harvest was a fleeting memory, stolen by a sky that had turned the color of bruised iron. For 2 days and a night, the storm had raged over the valley, not with gentle rain, but with a furious, wind-whipped deluge that turned the gentle creek behind Elara's home into a roaring, brown monster. The family huddled inside, listening to the howl and the crash, and when the dawn finally broke, sullen and gray, it revealed a scene of utter disarray. The small, stone-and-wood shed where they stored the precious, unsold wool from the fair had borne the brunt of the swollen creek's anger. One wall had been shoved in, and muddy water had surged through the opening, soaking and filthying the carefully cleaned and carded fleeces. The air hung heavy with the smell of wet sheep and despair. Elara's father looked old as he stared at the ruin, their livelihood for the coming year tangled in muck and debris. As her family began the heartbreaking work of pulling the heavy, waterlogged masses of wool into the weak sunlight, a hard knot of resolve tightened in Elara's stomach. They could not save this alone. They needed strong backs and dry ground, things they did not have. Her mind, sharp with worry, turned over possibilities, discarding one after another, until it settled on a single, steady face from the fair. The cowboy, Caleb, with his calm eyes and words that held no false comfort. He had a ranch, which meant land and hands. The idea of asking for help was a bitter draught to swallow, for pride was a thing they had in good measure, but watching her mother's shoulders slump as she lifted a ruined fleece made the choice clear. Without speaking her plan, for fear it would sound foolish aloud, she saddled their old, patient horse and turned its head towards the distant rise where Caleb's land was said to be. The ride was a long one, through mud-clogged tracks and across a creek still running high and fast. The ranch, when she finally saw it, was not grand, but it was solid and well-ordered. A sturdy wooden house stood flanked by a large barn and corrals where horses stood flicking their tails. Her courage nearly failed her then, a small, mud-spattered figure on a tired horse arriving unannounced at the door of a practical stranger. But Caleb himself emerged from the barn, his expression not one of surprise or annoyance, but of simple recognition. He listened in silence as she explained the disaster, her voice low but steady, her eyes meeting his without flinching. She did not ask for charity. She asked for work, any work, to earn the coin to pay for the repairs they so desperately needed. Caleb looked past her, towards the waterlogged valley, then back at her face, seeing the grit and the grief warring within her. He saw not a beggar, but a partner in distress. "I won't give you a handout," he said, his voice even. "But I'll make you a trade. My north fence line took a beating in the storm. It's a hard week's work for two, mending it. You help me with those fences, and I'll bring my wagon and my men down to your place. We'll raise that wall and get your wool spread to dry." It was a fair deal, brutally so, and Elara respected him for it. She nodded her agreement, the weight on her shoulders shifting from one of hopelessness to one of pure, physical toil. The next days were a trial of muscle and will. Under a sky that slowly cleared to a pale, forgiving blue, Elara worked alongside Caleb. He taught her how to dig a post hole deep and true, how to stretch the wire tight without it snapping back, and how to drive a staple with a sure swing of the hammer. Her palms blistered and then calloused. Her arms ached with a deep, unfamiliar burn. She learned the rhythm of the work, the quiet that existed between tasks, broken only by the necessary words of instruction or the call of a distant hawk. Caleb was a man of few words, but she came to understand his language. A grunt of approval when she set a post straight, a slight nod when she managed a tricky splice in the wire. In the evenings, as they shared a simple meal by the fence line, he would ask about the wool, about the different grades and their uses, and she would explain, her passion for her craft making her forget her weariness. By the week's end, the fence stood straight and strong, a new, silver thread running across the green and brown hills. True to his word, Caleb loaded his wagon with tools and, with two of his ranch hands, followed Elara back to her damaged home. The sight that met her eyes, which she had left in despair, was now one of bustling activity. Her father and Caleb worked side by side, heaving the new timber into place. The ranch hands, with good-natured strength, helped haul the heavy, but now drying, wool to higher ground. In the space of a single day, what had been a ruin was set right. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows, Caleb wiped the sweat from his brow with his sleeve and looked at the repaired shed, then at Elara. No grand speeches were made, but in that shared glance, a deep and unshakable trust had been forged, not in easy times, but in the honest labor of overcoming hardship together. The rhythm of life settled into a new and comfortable pattern after the mending of the fence and the shed. Elara found her thoughts turning more and more frequently toward the ranch on the ridge, not with worry, but with a quiet, budding sense of connection. It was during the height of a warm, dry afternoon, while she was guiding the family's small flock of sheep to a high meadow for better grazing, that she noticed a thin, dark plume marring the clear blue sky. It rose from the direction of Caleb's land, not from the homestead itself, but from the far wooded ridge that bordered his northern pasture. A cold dread, sharper than any winter wind, pierced her heart. Grass fire was a rancher's nightmare, a hungry beast that could consume everything in its path. Without a second thought for her own flock, which were safe and content, she turned her horse and urged it into a gallop, riding not away from the danger, but directly toward its source. The world became a blur of green and brown as she pushed the horse up the familiar trail. The smell reached her first, that acrid, terrifying scent of smoke and scorched earth. As she broke through the tree line into the open pasture, the scene before her was one of stark, desperate struggle. A line of fire, whipped by a fitful breeze, was eating its way through the dry grass toward a stand of timber. And there, alone, was Caleb, a solitary figure fighting a losing battle. He was using a saddle blanket, beating at the flames with powerful, rhythmic strokes, his shirt darkened with sweat and soot. He glanced up as she slid from her horse, his expression a mixture of surprise and grim determination. There was no time for words. Elara tore her own thick woolen shawl from her shoulders, dunked it in a nearby water trough, and without a moment's hesitation, joined him on the fire line. They fought together as the sun dipped lower, a silent, soot-blackened team. Where his blanket fell, hers followed. They created a break in the advancing line, stamping at embers with their boots, their world shrinking to the next patch of flame, the next gust of wind. The heat was immense, singeing the hairs on their arms and painting their faces with grime. More than once, a shifting wind sent a wall of heat and sparks toward them, and Caleb would instinctively step in front of her, taking the brunt of it, his body a shield. It was a brutal, physical dance, a test of endurance where a single misstep could mean disaster. Finally, after what felt like an age, the last persistent ember was smothered, leaving behind a wide, blackened scar on the land and a profound, ringing silence broken only by their ragged breaths. The walk back to the ranch house was slow, their bodies aching and drained. Inside the quiet, sturdy kitchen, lit only by the soft glow of the evening light through the window, the reality of their close escape settled upon them. They were a pair of scarecrows, their clothes torn and reeking of smoke, their skin mapped with soot and minor burns. Caleb brought a basin of clean, cool water and a soft cloth. He gestured for her to sit, and with a tenderness that belied his strength, he began to gently wipe the grime from her face. The touch of the cool cloth on her heated skin was a shock, a feeling of pure, uncomplicated care. She then took the cloth from him and did the same, carefully cleaning the soot from his brow, from the strong line of his jaw, her fingers tracing the weary lines around his eyes. In that quiet, shared act of cleansing, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the danger they had faced and the profound connection forged within it. He took her hands, his own rough and scarred, and held them firmly, looking at their linked fingers as if seeing them for the first time. Then his gaze lifted to hers, and in his eyes, she saw not just the quiet cowboy or the steadfast partner, but a man whose heart was as laid bare as her own. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to turn away, but she met him halfway. Their kiss was not one of fiery passion, but of something deeper and more lasting. It was a kiss of gratitude for safety, of respect for shared strength, and a silent, solemn promise. It was the honest and powerful culmination of all the unspoken words that had passed between them since the day at the fair, a moment not of fancy, but of a love that had been tested by hardship and found to be as strong and resilient as the land itself. The wheel of the year turned fully, bringing once more the crisp air and the golden light that heralded the harvest fair. The village green was just as bustling, the music just as lively, and the smells of spiced cider and pies were just as sweet. But for Elara, standing at the edge of the familiar scene, everything felt profoundly different. She was not a shadow watching from the sidelines this time. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Caleb, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. The simple, blue dress she wore was the same one from the year before, but she wore it not with shame, but with a quiet pride that seemed to radiate from within. The whispers of "I'm not pretty" that had once haunted her had been silenced, not by empty compliments, but by a year of shared labor and a love that valued the strength of her spirit above all else. She looked out at the dancing couples and felt no pang of longing, only a deep, settled contentment. They moved through the fair together, a familiar pair to the villagers now. They stopped at the wool cart, where Elara's father beamed with a pride that had nothing to do with commerce, and they greeted the ranch hands who tipped their hats with genuine respect. The memory of the storm and the fire was a part of them now, a story woven into the fabric of their lives, but it was a story of resilience, not of loss. As the afternoon sun began to mellow, casting long, gentle shadows from the great oak tree at the edge of the green, Caleb led her to its quiet shade. The noise of the fair faded into a pleasant hum, a distant soundtrack to a moment that felt entirely their own. He turned to face her, taking both of her work-roughened hands in his. His calm eyes, which had first seen her true self a year ago, now held a light she had never seen before, a mixture of unwavering certainty and tender hope. "Elara," he began, his voice low and steady, but filled with an emotion that made it richer than she had ever heard it. "A man can look his whole life for something fancy, and end up with nothing but empty hands. I wasn't looking for fancy. I was looking for honest. I was looking for strong. I was looking for a partner to face the storms and the fires with." He paused, his thumbs gently stroking her knuckles. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever known, not because of how you look in this light, but because of the light you carry inside you. It's the light of your honesty, and your courage. It's the light that led you to my ranch, and to that fire on my ridge." He took a slow breath. "Build a life with me. Be my wife, and let me be your husband. Let us fill our home with this honest kind of love, for all our days." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or of an old, forgotten pain. They were tears of a happiness so profound and so solid it felt like a foundation stone being laid in her soul. There were no doubts, no whispers of inadequacy. In his eyes, she was seen, and she was beloved for exactly who she was. "Yes," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of all her healed hopes and newfound strength. "Yes, Caleb. Nothing would make me happier." As he slipped a simple, braided band of silver onto her finger, a perfect and unfancy token of his promise, the fiddle music from the fair seemed to sweep toward them, as if the whole world was celebrating their joy. And as they walked back, hand in hand, to join the dance, their future stretched out before them, not as a fairy tale, but as a real and lasting promise. It was a future of sunrises over shared chores, of quiet evenings by the hearth, and of facing whatever the seasons brought, together. Their story was a testament to the power of an honest heart, a reminder that the truest happy endings are not found in fancy things, but in simple, enduring love. If this tale of resilience and hope has warmed your heart, there are countless other stories waiting to be discovered, each one a new journey into a world where love and honesty always find a way. Subscribe to the channel for more, and never miss the next chapter of courage and connection. Their first dance as a betrothed couple was not graceful or practiced, but it was perfect. Held close in his arms, surrounded by the community that had witnessed their journey, Elara knew, with a certainty as deep as the earth itself, that she was finally, completely, and unshakably home.